Hej och välkomna till Mobilitetspodden.
Välkomna.
Tack så mycket. Idag så ser vi att vi har lite olika. Jag står här i studion och så har vi med oss 2 stycken på länk idag. Och det ena är ju då min poddkollega Patrik.
Stämmer.
Hallå.
Hemma och återhämta mig efter en lite lättare förkylning. Inte pandemin vill påpeka det, att ingen behöver oroa sig för mig.
Precis, så. Men vi håller oss på olika destinationer här. Och jag står här i poddstudion som heter Anna Wadström. Och sen så har vi då med oss idag en gäst som snart ska få presentera sig. Och innan vi gör det så kommer vi att byta till engelska. För att vi ska ta det här avsnittet på engelska idag. Så att det blir spännande. Och då säger jag hello and welcome to you, Andrew.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Great to be with you.
We're so excited to have you here. And before we start today's episode with going into the theme, we would like you to introduce yourself. So who are you, Andrew? Please tell us.
Sure. So I'm Andrew Smith. I'm the General Manager and Managing Director for Avis Budget Sweden and also Avis Budget Denmark. I live in Copenhagen. I split my time, well, in normal times at least, between Sweden and Denmark, and have done this role really for about 3 years now, looking after both countries and really working with Avis Budget to turn our businesses in Denmark and Sweden from being traditional car rental businesses into mobility businesses. And I'm sure we'll talk a little more about that later on.
Quite a big responsibility, I'd say.
Yeah, 2 fantastic countries, 2 very different countries that, work in quite different ways at times as well, with consumers and tastes that change and differing needs around both countries. But 2 fascinating countries as well. I love my time here in terms of the experience and the area and the change that's going on as well around the way that consumers are changing, around that we're all changing in terms of our tastes and needs and behaviours. And I think it's a fascinating time for our industry.
Definitely.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, Andrew. And as we do to all our guests, we also would like to hear a little bit about your mobility, the trip that you've done. Have you changed your mobility behavior in the last few years?
Yeah, certainly. And I think my behavior has probably changed in line with perhaps some of the wider economy. So, for example, I have a house in the UK still where I lived before coming to Denmark, and it's something I use Airbnb to let out. So we use shared services, and since also coming to live here, I've spent a lot of time exploring around Sweden, Denmark, a little bit of Norway as well. And through everything that I've done, the experience and traveling has been through shared economy, for example, Airbnb, and I think mobility is going in that same direction as well. And my experiences have been the same. With my wife, and we have 2 children, and since moving to Copenhagen, we live in a city. We have 1 car now. We used to have 2 cars in the UK, our own cars that we used, and I think we've realised, as so many people have realised, that if your car is sitting on the street most of the time, being used for 5 or 10% of the time, and actually you don't need to. There are so many different mobility solutions around now that mean we can access transport in a different way.
And I think it's sort of resonates with one of the most common topics or issues within this behavior change that we sort of want to achieve within the mobility industry. Perhaps we can't remove the private car entirely, or not just yet, but perhaps we can reduce from owning 2 cars to at least 1. So I think it's a perfect example of what we are actually trying to achieve within the industry. Really interesting, yeah.
Exactly. And as we have almost sort of touched on the subject today, and let's not wait any longer to introduce the theme of today. We are going to talk about traditional rental cars and what Avis has been through, and going through the history of that and into more sharing cars and car sharing that we have heard of today. And we think that some of our listeners maybe don't know the difference between these 2, and maybe most of them have more an overview of what rental cars are. So we would like to take you on a little trip here, starting from maybe 10 years ago and going back in time to talk about rental cars and what Avis has done since then?
Sure. So Avis as a brand has been around for 70 years. Through 70 years, we've developed a deep experience, a deep expertise in managing mega fleets of vehicles. And car rental, most people are familiar with car rental, how it operates. And car rental over that time has continued to evolve and will continue to evolve in the future as well. I mean, our goal as a company is to be Europe's most trusted and leading mobility provider. So the experience we provide to our customers will differ from the traditional rental service through to shared mobility. But we're really moving with customers and moving with time, because customers' behaviours are changing, people's expectation is changing. As consumers, all of us, we want things now. We're not prepared to wait anymore in the way that we perhaps were 10 years ago. So car rental, car sharing has really merging together, and a lot of it's happening through technology. Technology is driving a lot of that change, where consumers now want to make a booking through their app on their phone, through their computer, rather than the ways that used to happen in the past. People also have I think a shorter tolerance for the lead time. So we see a lot of customers who are making short-term decisions. They're choosing to rent a car for a weekend because the weather looks good, and they're making that decision on the Wednesday or the Thursday and want to collect the car on a Friday. They're not doing it 2 or 3 months ahead, as perhaps was the case in the past. And people also want an increasingly digital experience in terms of the whole process. So we're really moving our business from the traditional car rental model, where you would go to the counter and you'd queue for your vehicle and have to produce lots of paperwork. We have something called digital smart service. So our customers are able to provide all their details in advance and access the vehicle with minimal queuing, with minimal fuss, in a way, because they've provided their driving license details in advance. We have all that details on file. We can make a shorter process when it comes to collect the vehicle. The same on return. We've invested hugely when the vehicle comes back to make sure that everything we do is captured now via smart devices, so we can share any information we need to with the customer smartly via email now as well. No pieces of paper, a smooth and a seamless rental experience, which is good for everybody. It's good for us, but it's also good for the customer, because the customer wants a smooth and a fast process. They want to reduce stress or reduce time in the process, because time is such a valuable commodity for all of us now. Yeah. So we're seeing, I guess, what you'd call new car sharing coming together with car rental in a way that many customers are saying, actually, whether I need a car for 1 day or 2 days or one month or 2 months, they can trust us through a technology-enabled solution to provide whatever they need whenever they need it.
Yeah.
So if we, because I think the traditional view on renting cars would be that you get to an airport, you land on an airport, and then you go out to the Avis counter, you fill in all our paperwork, insurance, and so on and so on. It takes quite a while, and then you have to find your car at some big parking lot or something like that. But today, if we still use the airport example, you get off your flight, you just log on to an app, I assume, and you sort of get everything is sorted out. You have filled in all your personal information before, and it's just sort of going from the gate to the car, essentially. That's sort of the trajectory you're on at this point.
Yeah, precisely. So we have an award-winning app that has made it much easier for our customers to get a smooth, seamless transaction. And in the app, you can manage your bookings, you can extend your booking, you can choose, you can change your car, you can swipe left and swipe right before you pick up your car to choose a different vehicle if you so want to. We provide all that information to customers so they can make that choice. You can have all the paperwork, the insurances, as you mentioned, the contact details all added. So that actually the time you then spend, as you say, waiting or queuing or searching for your car is no more. And even on the app, we even tell the customer exactly where the car is, which parking space, so they can go direct to their vehicle, which just reduces time. I think for all of us, time is now such a valuable commodity, and customers really value that, certainly in an airport transaction, because people are trying to get to their home or to a business meeting or to go and see friends or family. So they want to spend their time on that journey and getting to their destination, not waiting or queuing for their rental car. So we totally support that. And technology is a huge enabler for our industry to allow that to be possible. So all of our rental stations are adaptable with that technology to make the pickup and, of course, the returns process as well as easy and simple as possible. And increasingly, of course, these days, contactless is important. And certainly in these COVID times, people are very aware of, not needing to physically sign things and hand over pieces of paperwork. So moving to all of this happening electronically also provides a safe experience for our customers as well. And we think that's going to be really important in the next 6 months or so as people start to get the confidence to travel again, to move around. That contactless, safe rental experience is going to be a real vital part of the experience to our customers.
Definitely. And I think also the example that you lift up here, Patrik, when someone goes like to an airport and actually travels somewhere else, I think that's maybe the most common way to think about rental cars. But what we're seeing now is like a shift in, as you're saying, the personal cars that you don't need to go to like an airport or travel to another country, but you can use shared cars in your everyday life. So maybe explain something about that too, that people are changing their behavior in their personal life as well, not only when they're on vacations, but also in their everyday life.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a big switch between, and particularly it's most prominent in the larger cities, in Stockholm, in Gothenburg, in Malmo, for example, where people are actually saying, a bit like me, I used to have 2 cars in my family, I'm now going to have 1 car, or I used to have my own car and it sat on the street for 95% of the time and just cost me an insurance and tax and maintenance and all of these charges, of course. And people are saying, actually, I don't need to have a car because I'm actually only going to use it for a limited period of time. So we see customers who need a car for a short period of time. Of course, we're now in the peak vacation period in Sweden, where people are away and traveling and have been traveling over the last few weeks to enjoy the vacation period. And what they have said to us is, we need a car for a month. And we need a car so we can go and explore Sweden. And particularly while there's been so much more domestic vacationing last year and this year, we see customers who say we need a car for a month, a certain size of vehicle, we'll take the vehicle and then we'll return it at the end, because actually for the rest of the time we use public transport and other means of getting around, mobility solutions, scooters, all sorts, of course, that are available to all of us. So we see that trend. We also saw, for example, last year when COVID first hit and the railways were saying, for example, we recommend not taking public transport for your own safety. We saw a big move of people moving into what we call mini lease. So sort of mid-term rentals, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. So people were still traveling to their places of work or for their leisure activities, and people took a car, and they took a car because they believed it was a safe experience for that time. But then when people started to work from home a little bit more, or people's traveling patterns changed, then they could return the car. But equally then for their vacation or for their Christmas visits or for their activities that they had beyond that, they know they can still access the car for a shorter period of time. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. This is where I think it's all starting to morph together. And customers want, we think, sort of a service they can trust, a safe, seamless transaction, as I talked about in terms of the handover of the vehicle and the return of the vehicle, but to have that vehicle available on demand as and when they need it. That's the big trend that we're seeing. And it's really being dominated by the cities. We're not seeing it quite so much in the smaller towns and cities yet. We're seeing the smaller towns and cities adapt this a little bit slower. I think car ownership is a little higher in those locations, which probably explains it. But if you buy a new apartment in Stockholm now, the chances are it probably doesn't come with a parking space. Whereas 10 or 20 years ago, probably every apartment would have had parking space and access to parking, and that's not the case now. When new apartment blocks are reconfigured or built, they're built without one space per owner. So actually now we see customers who actually find it difficult to own a vehicle, and of course, we welcome that in a way, because we can help with the shared economy, because we can provide an asset to them which we look after, we maintain, we service, we support, we insure. We can take that stress out of the way for the customer and provide them with the vehicle when they need it, whether it's for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days for a weekend, or 2 or 3 months because they need a car for a business project, a work project, or for a longer period of time for their vacation. So we're seeing more and more customers saying, actually, I'm now confident enough, not just in Avis, but in the wider mobility world, that there's a range of solutions that fit my needs. That means I can actually get away with not having a car and rely on good quality third-party suppliers and companies like ours to provide that service to them.
So I got stuck a bit on the thing with you what you sort of telling us is that people are today expecting more flexible leasing times than previously, than with a traditional rental car. Would you say this has been challenging to your business models? How have you been having a hard time to adapting to a new, more flexible and dynamic behavior?
Yeah, it does create challenges, but equally, there are challenges that we have to overcome, and for our business to evolve and develop and to be here in another 70 years' time, then we have to overcome those challenges. And I think people do have the expectation now of more flexibility, and like I say, through our apps, through our technology solutions, we now enable customers to extend their booking, to bring the car back early, to change their bookings at short notice, and that's okay, because actually that's a service that our customers want and expect. In a way, probably you're seeing a bit of a change between the different, we call it segments in our business. I think corporate travellers have often behaved that way in the past, with that flexibility. Maybe a meeting's changed, they need to quickly jump on a flight to their next location or drive to another city because the meeting has moved or something has changed. And I think leisure travellers is perhaps where it's changed the most recently. People expect this level of flexibility now for their own leisure bookings as well. So again, through technology, through making sure we have the right operational procedures in place, and the advantage of a rental car is you always get a clean car. It's being prepared for you. Again, it's very safe as a transaction, and it helps our customers understand that they know what they're going to get. So building in the flexibility, can be challenging to our business model, because in the past somebody would have a very clear checkout date and a very clear return date, and that's all set up and advanced. Now people have that expectation around flexibility, but we have to adapt to that. We are adapting to that. That's fundamental to how the industry is changing. And equally, how we want to change and we want to develop this is to also work with partners, because I think the whole mobility journey won't be one that one company can fix on their own. We have to partner up with other providers, and we have to make the experience even more seamless for customers. And that might mean that actually your journey is split into different segments. It could have a rental car as part of it. It could have a mobility scooter. It could have public transport as part of it. There could be all sorts of different solutions we provide, and we want to work with good, trusted partners so we can ensure that the customer has an even more seamless journey in 5 or 10 years' time than even to what they have right now.
Very interesting. And one thing that you mentioned there was the insurance part. Maybe we can talk a little bit about how that has changed, because a few years back you paid a pretty good, like a solid amount that was reserved on your account when you had a rental car. And that has changed too, hasn't it?
There's different options for customers. So insurance is something which you can. It depends on your level and attitude towards risk, in truth. We do offer enhanced insurance packages for our customers, which enables them to have a completely worry-free journey. But if the car does get damaged through their own fault or even through a third party driving into your car, it does happen. And of course, people in unfamiliar locations, cities and towns they're not familiar with, then the incident rate is higher than it would be in an area very well. Then actually customers have a choice to take enhanced insurances and reduce any risk down to zero. Equally, when our standard product includes the basic insurances necessary by law, but it does mean if a car is damaged, then of course we have to apply a fair and reasonable charge for that damage when the vehicle is returned. So we have a number of different packages, very flexible for our customers. It depends on whether the customer wants to take the insurance packages or would prefer to take that risk and, of course, avoid the accident. We never want a customer to have an accident. That is the last thing we ever want. So there's a misconception that actually we make money out of repairs. We don't. And we get the car back on the fleet as quickly as we can. But, of course, if there is a damage that the customer has caused on their rental, then we're happy to make sure we either offer them a product where they can pay this upfront, so they take away the risk, or, of course, we then charge at fair and reasonable rates against market rates if a damage has occurred on the rental. So insurance is one of those areas where we've worked hard over the years to make sure we have a fair and reasonable proposition to our customers. But equally, if a car does get damaged, it is an expensive cost for us that we simply look to pass on to the customer.
What's the most common used for the customers? Like, what do they want? Do they want to have a risk-free, or do they?
It's a good question. It's probably about 70% don't take the insurances, something around that sort of level. It does vary a little bit by town and city again, and of course by time of the year as well. And we're offering, even with our long-term rentals, our mini lease products, we offer like what we call Avis All-In now, which is a fully inclusive product, which includes additional things. So a lot more of our customers are saying they just want a stress-free experience, whether that experience is at the counter, whether that experience is during their rental, whether that experience is making the booking in the first place. So we offer all range of products to make that solution as stress-free as possible, because we don't want the customer to be stressed, because a stressed customer isn't good for us either. We want the customer to have a happy experience. We want the customer to continue to use us as their preferred and trusted partner. and we work hard to surprise and delight them through their whole experience to make sure they get as good a good experience with Avis as possible. So certainly it's something that we try not to create friction in the relationship. We want to work with good customers who trust us for the next 70 years, as I mentioned. That's a fundamental part of our business model. So certainly it's something that we work hard to try and reduce any points of friction with our customers, so they have as good an experience with us as possible. And actually Sweden is one of our top three or four countries around the world for customer satisfaction. So there's more we can do. We can always get better in these things, and quite rightly our customers' expectations is always increasing as well. But I'm proud of the fact we're in the top countries in the world, and we want to continue to do that and to make sure our customers are even more delighted in the future.
I was just curious. I'd like to back up a bit because I had a thought, or I'd like to have a confirmation on a certain thing. Because when Anna and me were doing consultancy work within the mobility sector, we always talk about the driving forces behind mobility. Why are we here today talking about mobility today in 2021? And we always go back to that technology and digitalization has been quite essential driving forces for the rapid change we see in mobility today. We talk about technology as an enabler for mobility, and it sounds to me that this has certainly been the case for Avis, that the flexibility you're able to offer your customers today, that is mostly a result from a technological change we've seen in the recent years. Would you say that's true for Avis?
I think it is true. I think technology has been an enabler towards all of this, but I think also there's another factor at play which is very prominent in Sweden, which is also customers want access to the latest technology. And Swedish consumers are very forward-thinking in terms of technology. I've seen many international reports that always show Sweden towards the top of the international leaderboard when it comes to the use of technology. But I think there's also another factor around consumers wanting access to the latest fleet. I think one of the big reasons for that is also environmental. Environmental concerns are a much higher concern to Swedish consumers. We run lots of surveys. We ran a report called the Future of Mobility Report a couple of years ago, and it really showed that Swedish consumers in particular really place a high value on environmental. And I think one thing that a lot of our customers are telling us is they want us to have a very new fleet, and we do keep a very new fleet. Our cars are typically, on average, less than 12 months old, so it's always the latest technology available to customers. And of course, the latest technology is more environmentally friendly. So around about 50% of our cars now are officially classified as environmental vehicles, which means either ultra low carbon plug-in hybrid vehicles or pure electric vehicles. And many customers are now saying, actually, we're choosing to take a rental car, we're choosing to choose Avis because of your environmental fleet, and because the fact that these cars actually, when I take a car, when I go on my journey, I can actually reduce my impact on the environment by choosing the latest technology, very low carbon cars. And that's becoming an increasingly important factor, certainly in Sweden. We don't see that in every country. It's certainly, there's 2 or 3 countries which are definitely leading the way, and Sweden is one of them, along with Norway certainly as well. And actually, I think what customers are saying as part of their mobility journey is another reason why I'm prepared to maybe get rid of a car or not own the car anymore, is I will always have access to the very latest technology. And that actually, for me, when I do need to use a vehicle, and I don't need to use a vehicle for every part of my traveling needs, but when I do need to, I want to make sure I'm choosing the most environmentally friendly solution. And we introduced just over a year and a half ago now, at the start of 2020, we introduced dedicated car groups for environmental vehicles where the customers are guaranteed a plug-in hybrid or an electric vehicle they can choose. Some people are still a little nervous of pure electric because of the perceived range anxiety. And if I'm traveling from Stockholm 7 hours up to Umeå, then I'm a little concerned on whether the car's going to make it. And we do 2 things. We offer a plug-in hybrid as well, which gives them a backup as well in terms of having the plug-in hybrid vehicle. And also we help the customer with their journey and say, actually, well, here's where you can charge the vehicle if you do want to take the pure electric vehicle. And we're really seeing customers flocking to that. It was a bit of a risk, a bit of an experiment. We didn't know how this was going to be interpreted because, of course, a rental car does tend to do higher mileage than a personal car on average. But actually, we've really received some very, very positive feedback from our customers that they like the fact they can choose and be guaranteed the environmental vehicle because they believe that the choice they're making is having the lowest impact on the environment. So certainly, I think that's also another major factor that's driving the mobility journey, that customers want access to the latest environmentally friendly vehicles, which of course we're happy to provide because the newest vehicles are always more environmentally friendly than the older ones. So we're continuing to bring our fleet, modernise it all the time as we take on new cars and dispose of the previous cars. And certainly that's something that seems to be driving the mobility journey, particularly in Sweden as well, not so much a dynamic we're seeing in every other country.
That's really exciting to hear, because we usually have we do a lecture where we speak about 5 driving forces, where sustainability or the environmental issue is another one beside technology and digitalization. So it's sort of confirming and adding on to our belief, and I think we'll stick to those beliefs. But I had you mentioned that the cars were usually newer than 12 months. In terms of circular economy, where does the sort of old cars end up? How do you work with that type of circular economy?
Yeah, they mainly go to dealer groups around Sweden. A few get exported, but the majority stay within Sweden. So a lot of customers, when they want to buy a vehicle, they don't want to buy a new vehicle because there is a cost of buying a new vehicle. And when you drive the vehicle out of the forecourt, it can lose quite a bit of value almost overnight. So a lot of customers are, I think, very savvy consumers in Sweden as well, and they want a nearly new vehicle. So a car that's 12 months old, or sometimes even less than 12 months old, with relatively low mileage on the clock, in perfect as new condition, then that's quite an attractive proposition to them. So we sell all our cars within Sweden. We do deals at the start where we've worked out where it's going to go at the end of its life already. So the cars find their way into other Swedish fleets available for retail and for other consumers to buy who want to buy a vehicle that's a year old. And what we're even seeing now, actually, it links very closely to your point there on the environmental vehicles, is we're seeing a lot of customers who want to try an environmental car, who want to buy an electric car, and they actually don't know yet whether it's going to work for them. I was speaking to a customer the other day, and he told me that I'd like to try this vehicle. I'm not quite yet ready to put my money behind this and to buy a vehicle, but actually I'm renting one for 2 or 3 months with you to see what the experience is like. Because he said, I don't trust what the manufacturers say in their brochures and leaflets. I actually want to see whether the vehicle does do the mileage and the charging that I'd expect. I want to see whether I can get access to spaces, because I live in a city, and actually I see electric charging points, but sometimes they're full, sometimes they're not. I want to really understand for myself what that experience is for me and my family. I actually have to say he said he was delighted, because actually the vehicle range was better than he expected. The access to charging wasn't a problem, but he said, actually the reason I rented this car from you was to experiment, and actually it's a safe way for me to experiment. I took the car for 2 or 3 months rather than spending many hundreds of thousands of kroner to buy a new car, and then if I found it wasn't for me, then that's a very expensive mistake I've made. I've then got to invest in a new vehicle. So we're seeing more and more customers, particularly around the environmental cars, particularly the electric cars, who are taking a car from us as an experiment to see whether it really is for them and their needs and their day-to-day behaviours or not. And again, I think that's quite an important part of our business, and will continue to be as the technology evolves and changes in the next few years to come.
I just wanted to ask, have you set up like a year that you are aiming to be zero emission for the whole fleet? Or is that too?
We think it would be difficult to get to zero emissions for the whole fleet. We think we can certainly get to carbon neutral, and we set a goal of being by 2026 to achieve that. I mentioned earlier that about 50% of our fleet is environmental. We measure our average CO2 output per vehicle, and we set ourselves a goal of a certain target by 2024. And we've actually achieved that goal already, which I'm really delighted by. And our team have done a fantastic job, our fleet teams, to find the most modern, the most environmentally friendly vehicles. So we need to set ourselves some new targets, and some even tougher targets to improve that even further, because actually we've got to a very low level. Again, it's helped by having the newest, latest technology, but actually, again, we want to do more on this. We also want to work with a lot of our customers, particularly our corporate customers, businesses, and there's an increasing demand, I think, also from some of the big companies we work with, where we can provide them with good quality reporting. For example, on how the vehicle is performing, how the vehicle is being driven, what the environmental output of the vehicle is. So we're working with technology providers that we have partnerships with as well, that allows us to provide good quality management information, so that when someone is taking a vehicle, they can really understand what it's contributed. and what the outcome has been for the environment, and equally what lessons can be learned from next time to improve it even further. So we see a big angle also for our corporate customers, increasing our leisure customers. You think when you book a flight now with certain airlines, they tell you what your CO2 output is going to be. We're aiming to do the same with rental cars and make sure that actually our customers have that knowledge, and that at the end of their journey they can really understand what they've contributed, and maybe then we work with them over time to say, how can we help you reduce your emissions even further? What else can we do to help you do the right thing for the environment? So we see that as being an important angle for the future as well.
It's really interesting because currently I'm working in a project within the business to business market, and when you do surveys with companies, you find that sort of environmental dashboards or some sort of highlighting of your CO2 emissions becomes increasingly important for companies. They want to sort of show that they are actually pulling their weight in terms of reducing CO2 emissions. So I think it's very much in line with what we see in other places in the mobility market. Really interesting.
Yeah, I think we're actually working with a partner who helps produce, and they aggregate all the data. They use our data, they use fleet and manufacturer data on the vehicle's performance, they use national data around the Swedish government. They bring it all together. It's a Swedish company, a Swedish supplier. They do a fantastic job, and what they can do is, and we're just trialing this now with our first couple of companies who are very pleased with the results so far. They bring it all together in a way we can actually produce management information. We can produce information for the driver, for the customer. So I think all of us, you don't know what you don't know. So the best we can do is provide the management information back, help the driver, help the company understand what else can be done to improve the outcomes for the environment, because it's a hugely important topic that we all need to be aware of and on every day. I always say to our team, the environment isn't just part of our strategy, it is our strategy. That's what we're helping enable. That's where it links back, I think, to the whole mobility piece, because the more and more we can persuade customers to give up their car, to hand back that 7 or 8 or 9-year-old car and actually to be in a 6-7 week old car, then the outcome to the environment is very different for exactly the same journey. So that's very much where our philosophy is, and we'll continue to invest in more and more environmental vehicles, because we would love to get to CO2 neutral. We'd love to get to zero outcome, because that's something which is the right thing for all of us to do. And we've got a big capital investment project. We're installing charging in all of our locations so that we can always make sure we give the car to the customer 100% charged. We work with partners, and we also help customers understand how they can make the best choices for charging the vehicle, where the locations are, where they can charge the vehicle, the cost of that, of course, and really helping this transition, because we're in the middle of what I think a really fascinating time for this whole industry right now, not only with mobility, but also with lower and lower carbon output vehicles. So the more and more we can do to enable that, then it's good for everybody. It's a win-win-win, I always think.
How much can you affect as a company the network of infrastructure for charging in the whole country or countries or even Europe?
Yeah, it's a great question. We do work on it. We do lobby, and we speak to governments and authorities and local authorities and promote it. And like I say, we've invested in our own networks as well at our rental stations, so we can always provide the vehicles. We work with the airports authorities, Swedavia, for example, who of course operate a lot of the bigger airports in Sweden. We work with them right now, and we're pushing everybody to say, actually, this needs to happen quickly and soon. It's more complex than we all think, because there's so many different stakeholders involved that you can't just switch on power charging for hundreds and hundreds of vehicles without an impact on the overall infrastructure, and cities are very aware of that. But equally on new projects, on new areas, we're working with a couple of property companies, for example, where we can provide vehicles into their basements and for their new consumers on a shared basis. We've had a couple of pilots ongoing within Sweden, within Stockholm and Gothenburg in the last couple of years on this, whereas actually when they install or build a new property and build, let's say, 100 apartments, that actually then there is electric infrastructure charging put in place. And if there isn't going to be a parking space for every apartment, which is often the case these days, then actually that we can offer shared cars available in their locations to give the consumer a mobility solution. So there's lots that we can do. If you ask me honestly, I think it's frustrating at times. I'd like to move faster than the progress that we have seen, because we do still see a lot of customers who tell us that they're still a little anxious. They're anxious on charging capability. They're anxious on whether that charger will be available when they need it. because actually they need the car during the day and they need to charge it overnight, or they don't want to leave the car and charge it during the day and have it in their driveway overnight. So there's more and more that I think we can do and will be doing and should be doing to improve that pace even further. But there has been some good progress in recent years. There is definitely more to do. I'm seeing more and more cities I think there's a bit of a competition going on, which is a really good thing, that they're actually competing with each other to get this in place. And I think consumers are also demanding more and more in terms of the expectation where I can get access to charging that will really enable the next phase and really widespread adoption of EV vehicles across Sweden. But some encouraging things happen. I was reading the recent car purchasing statistics, and I think the VW ID4 was the biggest selling car in April in Sweden, which is amazing. The first time I think an electric car has been at the top of the charts. That's a great thing. So the more and more we all pursue this, then I think we'll get the outcomes that we need, and a sensible set of networks and charging infrastructure that supports where we need to be in the future.
Yeah, so it's quite fun to hear all this. I mean, I am an electric scooter nerd to a large extent, and sometimes I sort of find myself just thinking about electric scooters as a new form of mobility. But apparently, the former rental cars are doing quite a lot to mobility as well. So it's sort of an eye-opener for me here today. But I'm also curious, you mentioned partnership, and you also said that there's not only one single mobility provider that will solve the big issue of mobility today. How would you, who do you see, what do you see in the future for Avis? Will you be sort of expanding your business to provide additional mobility types, or will you sort of integrate with other partners? Will you be the integrator, or do you want to be a party that's integrated to other solutions?
Yeah, we see our role concentrating on providing the car still. We don't have any plans to go into mobility scooters or other forms of transport, but I think the integration is going to be key, providing an integrated solution to customers, because I think right now if you have to make 3 or 4 bookings or 3 or 4 selections per journey, that can be a turn off to some customers. So we do think that integration of the technology will be key. So we are trying to pick with and work with the right partners, because this is still, I think, relatively early days. Some of the mobility solutions are still quite early in the journey compared to perhaps where they will be in 10 years time or 20 years time. So I think there's going to be, the revolution is ongoing still. There's going to be changes. So we're picking and trying to work with the right partners who can offer these solutions. We already work and have worked for many years with the airlines. So that's, sort of one piece which has been there for quite some time. But I think there's more we can still do with the, some of the local solutions, whether it's in cities, whether it's, because a lot of our rental locations are in very attractive locations. Of course, they're in airports, but they're also in very attractive downtown locations in Stockholm, in Gothenburg, in Malmö. We're within a very short distance of the railway stations, for example. So customers may then jump on the train as part of the next part of their journey. They may pick up a mobility scooter as the next part of their journey. They may take a different solution altogether. So where we see the integration, and again, technology will really help us with this, is we see customers having one solution where we can actually, you put in your starting position and your end position, and actually the applications or the technology solutions tell you the best way to get there. And maybe there's different price points, and there's a different speeds of the journey. So the customer then gets a choice of, actually, do I want to take route A or route B, depending on what my needs most are. And we see ourselves as being part of that journey, and having our technology working with other good technology and solution providers. And that's really what I think the next few years is going to be about for us, making sure we have the right partnerships, the right people who can offer the full service to the customer.
So that could imply that we, because within mobility, we always talk about mobility as a service and MaaS applications. You could see yourself as part in a MaaS solution in Swedish or Nordic cities. 100%.
Now, I think that's mobility partnerships is going to be a key. I think partnerships will bridge what I call the mobility gap. So I think, as you say, as a service, I think customers need to and will be increasingly viewing mobility as a holistic problem. And actually the companies who are providing the service, like us, we need to view it that way as well. So I think that whole infrastructure, that whole ecosystem, if I can call it that, will need to integrate more and more over time, because customers are already, I think, if you're if you're a young consumer now, I don't think perhaps you have the ambition to own a car, perhaps the same way when I was 16 or 17 years old. I think customers now, younger consumers, don't have that same expectation they're necessarily going to own a vehicle. When we ran our Future of Mobility survey, there was still a lot of love for the car. A lot of people still said they still saw themselves as car owners over time, but about 50% did say they were prepared to consider non-ownership solutions if it was there in a way that was interesting and available to them. So there's still a bit of skepticism over whether that's possible yet, but over the next few years it's changing. And certainly if you speak to the younger customers we have, younger consumers, I think they don't necessarily see the same ownership model as they had in the past. So for them, that whole mobility ecosystem is actually having a solution where I probably go on my phone or whatever the technology of the future will be, and I enter my start destination, my end destination, and the applications work out the best route for me. And I then have a choice, and I can press one button and I get the full service integrated and it's all set up for me. I think that's the expectation in the future. And particularly because time is such a precious commodity to all of us now, I think time is perhaps overtaking some of the previous needs around in the past around ownership. But people say, I just need a solution. Find me a solution, tell me the best solution. And actually I'm ambivalent, I'm relaxed on whether that's car, whether it's train, whether it's bike, whether it's scooter. I actually want the solution that's best for me in my journey. You tell me what the best way is to go. So I think that whole ecosystem will come together. I don't think any company can solve the entire problem. I don't think anyone's got the capability to do that. So it's going to require companies like ours to work together with good, reliable, trusted partners who share our values, who have the same care for the customer as we do, to make sure that we offer that end-to-end solution in a way that will work for those consumers of the future.
And when you talk about the car ownership, there has been a shift there as well, as you mentioned. And maybe you want to go into some, like when you went from only having rental cars into more car sharing and Zipcar as one of your own brands. What's the difference between these two services, and why did you start Zipcar?
Yeah, Zipcar is actually the largest car sharing company in the world, with over 1 million members of Zipcar. And that's one of our brands we operate. We don't operate it in Sweden at the moment, but we operate it in many towns and cities around the world, US, UK, for example. Car sharing is certainly for the bigger cities is something which is going to become even stronger. And our experience with Zipcar is, again, that it's around providing the car for the consumer when they need it, on the street, close locations to them. Because even we see this in our car rental business, maybe where the two start to come together, that customers are expecting on time, on demand provision of service now. And actually where Zipcar and car sharing works is that it's there immediately for the customer whenever they need it. So that certainly, from the whole Zipcar experience, has actually helped shape our car rental business as well, because we actually take a lot of learnings from Zipcar in terms of how you prepare the vehicle, how you get the vehicle ready for the next transaction, and increasingly, of course, how you maintain the vehicle, how you wash and clean the vehicle ready for the next customer, for example. There are really strong learnings we've taken from car sharing. I think the car sharing model doesn't work in every town and city. It works in the larger cities only. It's hard to make it commercially viable, and we've seen this in Sweden as well. We've seen many providers of car sharing schemes start up and then leave the business or leave Sweden months or years later. So we've certainly taken those learnings on board. You need a high concentration of people in terms of the population density. So it's probably only a model that works more in the big cities than some of the medium-sized or smaller cities. And of course, it needs a lot of cooperation and this is where it's also relevant for car rental, because you have to have cooperations with the local authorities around on-street parking. You have to have cooperations around how you refuel the vehicle, how you wash and clean the vehicle, prepare the car for its next customer. So all of these things do require quite a lot of cooperation. And again, this is this learning that we take into a car rental model. But I do think car sharing will continue to increase. And in a way, I think car rental was the prerequisite for car sharing. It's kind of where car sharing came from, because you still need to be able to manage big fleets of vehicles. And we think with our 70 years of experience, we're used to managing mega fleets of vehicles. That's where it's really important. And even some of the manufacturers who are very trusted partners to us and we've worked with very closely over many years, some of them have tried their own car sharing solutions and it hasn't always been successful. It is hard to operate. When you're operating, in our case, we operate 700,000 vehicles around the world. You need to be able to manage those fleets to prepare the vehicle, to maintain the vehicle, to make sure the vehicle is available. It has uptime, as we call it, available for customers. So all of these learnings from the car rental business also help shared mobility. And as the technology changes, as the technology adapts and develops, I think the two will increasingly become morphed into one between car rental and car sharing, because that's the expectation that consumers have in the future.
Yeah.
So is Zipcar a station-based or a free-floating solution?
Zipcar is a combination of free floating, so floating around from location to location, and also flex trip, so where the car starts and finishes in the same place. And for example, in London, we offer both solutions, so you can leave the car in one place, a different place to where you picked it up. But equally, if you have a round trip need and you're going to IKEA, for example, to collect some furniture, you don't own a car, you actually bring the car back to the same place where the journey started from. So different solutions, of course, for our customers gives them the choice, and equally for us, it allows us to plan the fleet, the logistics around the fleet, to make sure we have the cars in the right place to meet our consumers' needs. So it's a combination of both. But Zipcar started off in the US, and I think it's in 70 cities and towns in the US, and very strong service that Zipcar provides there, working with the universities, having cars on campus, for example. So definitely it's a strong business model that we do have, a business I would love to introduce into Sweden at some point in the future. It's certainly something that we can take a lot of learning as we morph our car rental business into the same models in the future.
To get all of our listeners in a good state here, can we clarify what's the difference between these two services? We have rental cars and we have shared cars. What would you say are the main differences to make it easier for everyone to understand?
The main difference is probably rental car is point to point. So you have a fixed location of pickup and a physical location in most cases, and then you have a fixed point where you're dropping it off. Maybe the same place. Most of our customers do return the car to the same place where they picked it up. But equally, we have what we call one ways, where a customer can drop the car in a different location, a different rental station somewhere else. The car sharing model tends to be much lower periods of time with the rental. So a typical car sharing location, we would so car share, you would have maybe 3 or 4 hour rental as opposed to 3 or 4 days or 3 or 4 weeks in some cases. So that's the key differences in the models. And often, as Patrik said, the vehicles are available on the street in shared parking spaces, so you don't go to a physical location, a retail location to pick up the vehicle. You collect it from wherever the vehicle is available.
Okay, but just to clarify that also, there are car sharing cars that are station based as well. So yeah, but maybe, as you mentioned, these two will morph into one service, so we don't call it rental car or car sharing. Maybe that's confusing for the customers in the future. Yeah,
I think it will morph together, as I've said. I think the technology is enabling that. Certainly, for a lot of our customers do still want to go to one location, because location they can go, there's still somebody they can talk to, they can ask questions, they can choose a different car because there's more than one car available, of course. So some customers it still works well for, and I still think we'll have physical locations where we can provide that service to our customers, where we can talk to them, they can talk to us, they can choose their vehicle, we can help them with their onward journey, as we do in many cases as well. But equally, I think over time there'll be more and more unmanned locations, street locations, as we talked about, and maybe this is where it's closer to the car sharing model. So, what's behind all of it is a fleet of vehicles that we provide to our customers that are safe and are well maintained and are serviced and are clean for our vehicles. So these fundamental principles sit behind both aspects of the business. But I think over time, and it's classic consumer behaviour. Some consumers will be happy to go to the vehicle on the street. It's all been done by the application. They're happy. It's one car. They know the car they're going to. They've seen the car in advance. They can check the vehicle. Other customers want to go and actually to see the vehicles and make a choice and look at the vehicle and have a person helping them with their queries. So I think it will be a mix of both in the future. That's my expectation of how it will look in 5 or 10 years' time.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting development that's going on in car sharing / rental cars, indeed. What do you think, Anna? Has this been sort of enlightening for you as well?
It has, very much so. And I'm thinking also, if we want to go to the user perspective again, and like our aim here is to make people do better choices when it comes to mobility, and for all of us to help here. And maybe we could say something about I think people are thinking, if everyone would just sell their own car and everyone would start using shared cars, we have this demand in different like peak times, so for vacations or in the weekends. And I think many people are very nervous about, like, is this going to work? Are there enough cars for us to all have a car when we need it? Or will do I have to book 2 years in advance just to get a car for my vacation? But what do you say about that? Do we have big enough fleet for that?
Yeah, again, that's where our 70 years of experience and expertise comes through, because we have a fantastic fleet team who source vehicles, who bring vehicles in. Like we talked about earlier with Patrik, is at the end of the life, those vehicles then get disposed and pass through into the retail segment. So, it's our job to make sure we have the right fleet to meet the demand. And like I said earlier also, that it's our job also to make sure that we can provide a service to our customers at short notice periods, because you can't necessarily plan what you're going to do suddenly in 2 years' time, sometimes even in 2 weeks or even 2 days' time. I think that's the lives we all live these days. So it's our job to plan that, to make sure the fleets are available. And of course, it's a bit like other segments where you can secure the car in a long while in advance if you need to, if you have that planning window. But equally, we want to make sure that customers can do it at the last minute if they need to as well, to support the way they're operating and behaving. So I do think it's something which the industry will solve and has to solve, and we have the technology and the solutions and the partnerships where we can solve this. Of course, there are different periods of the year as well. Everyone's very aware of the vacation period and the semester, of course, that's in place at the moment. But I think people also need to remember there's different times of the year when there's different parts of our business which are stronger. Of course, in the summer, we don't see so much business travel. Business travel is also very important for our business. So we have busy periods of the year with a lot of business travel. And that does allow us to have a relatively stable fleet. We don't need to suddenly take 3 or 4 times as many cars in the summer. We can actually use those cars for different purposes. It's used for the business consumers in the autumn, in the winter, in the spring. And in the summer, those cars are used when you and I go on our vacations and travel around Sweden or further afield. So, and then we have other parts of the business as well around. We have our medium-term business, which we call mini lease, which is more than 28 days rentals. And we're seeing more and more consumers who maybe are working on a work project where they need a car for 2 or 3 months because they've got a lot of traveling involved, but they don't want to take a 2 or 3 year commitment. They don't want to lease a car or have the capital expense of buying a car in the first place. So what those consumers are doing, saying, I need a car for 3 months. I need you to provide me with this service. And by the way, it may not be 3 months. It may be 2 months. It may be 4 months. It depends on how long the project's taking, or actually somebody is taken on a different role, or they're helping, or it could be a family reason where you need to travel more for a temporary period of time. So we also said these kind of mid-term segment, this is growing quite a lot because I think people are nervous, and there's still some nervousness, I think, in the Swedish economy as well around what's going to happen after COVID. Is the business going to bounce back? And people are understandably reluctant to make a 2 or 3 year commitment, which can be a big impact on your personal finance. So actually they're saying, well, I'd rather take a 2 or 3 month commitment. I can see quite clearly what's happening in the next 2 or 3 months. And actually we can then provide them with a car or a mobility solution for that period of time only. So again, it's something that's lending itself towards where I think the industry is going, that we can provide a solution for a few hours or a day, but equally for a few months if we want to as well. We have customers who remain in our mini lease vehicles for many months, and we update the vehicle, we change the vehicle when we get new models in, of course, but we have customers who sit in our cars almost permanently over a longer period of time because actually they enjoy the flexibility that it creates for them. And if they do have a change in their personal circumstances, or if it's a business, then actually something changes in their business, they can pass back the car quite quickly, and if they don't need to use it going forwards.
Thank you. Yeah, Patrik, what do you think? Do you have Do you have more questions for Andrew? This has been a very good conversation.
I think it is. But I think we've touched on most of the subjects we actually aim to sort of disclose today. And as I said, it's been very enlightening. It's and I think it's very cool to see and mobility provider that you sort of niched within a certain kind of tiny, I wouldn't say tiny segment, but within a certain segment. And all of a sudden you realize that sort of people are actually taking the holistic approach to mobility, and it's apparent that Avis has done so. That's what I find really interesting, that sort of everyone is sort of pondering this question: how can we pull our weight within the big issue of mobility? How can we make people travel more environmentally friendly, and how can we actually meet the more dynamic and flexible demand that people are expressing today? And Avis is apparently doing quite well in these areas. So yeah, it's cool to see.
Yeah, and I think the next period of time is also going to be fascinating for the industry, and I think there's a lot of talk around smart cities and how smart cities, for example, can integrate. And I think again, this is part of the deep collaborations and integrations that we want to create as well, because there's more we can do. And I think the future of mobility will change more and more around, the urban journey that we're on, and smart cities will be part of this. We see in Asia and in places where we operate, the levels of integration now between the partnerships and between the providers like us, but also the cities and the municipalities is also going to be a big feature in the future. So I think smart infrastructure will also be an important factor for city living. And of course, that has then an impact on our business and just your day-to-day behavior as a consumer in those locations. So it's fascinating. It's exciting. I think it's a really amazing time for our industry, a great time to be involved with it, and I think the change we've seen in the last 5 or 10 years, we'll see that level of change every 2 years, maybe even less going forwards. It's going to be that fast-paced going forward. So it's a fascinating time to be involved in the wider mobility segment and all the changes that we're all seeing coming in the coming weeks, months, and no doubt years.
Really
definitely.
Much so. Yep.
So I'll hope our listeners will find this just as interesting and enlightening as we've found it today. It's been really interesting to see this new take on a traditional segment within the mobility world. So huge thank to you, Andrew. Very nice to have you here and recording today. Big thanks. And I'd like to point out that not once we went international as we've done today, perhaps we should be kind to our listeners, our new international listeners, to provide our contact information in English for first time. So if you got any questions, any feedback, any comments on this episode, you do what, Anna?
You either email us on Mobilitetspodden @isinnovation.se, or you can comment on the episodes or find our LinkedIn profiles or other social media and comment and give us feedback.
Yes. And also, if you'd like to get in touch with Andrew, we'll publish his contact information on the platforms where we'll publish the episode eventually. So you'll find all contact information to Andrew there. So huge thanks to you, Andrew. Thank you for being here with us today and giving us these great insights on how you approach the mobility issue from the rental car, or should I say, the car sharing side. And with that, I'd like to wish you all a pleasant afternoon, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you,
Goodbye.
Andrew.